Good evening, everyone. Once again, welcome to We Are the Builders Australia, and tonight we have my co-host and close comrade, Helen Woolley. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Dave. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. I've been very busy, but very good at the same time. I think we're glad to be at the other end of lockdown again. So back out there visiting sites and yeah, getting on with usual business and with members. And so, look, today we're actually on chapter 1.2 out of this book again. We are city builders from the Centre of Political Innovation Education Manual of Caleb Maupin. We're on 1.2, and the chapters we're going to be talking about is 1.21 is Revolutionary Intelligentsia and the Broad Masses, the Synthetic Left, and what was the one after that? It was Susan Sontag's new definition of fascism. But before I continue on, just to let you know, broadcasting here from Bendigo, the land of the Jar Wrong, and we acknowledge the. We've got some background noise there. Just going to put you on mute, see if it works. And just want to acknowledge the elders, past, present, and future, and also recognise that their struggle was part of a broader struggle against imperialism, the anti-colonial struggle, and to this day they are still fighting for their own way forward, their own independence, and acknowledge that their struggle is part of the broader class struggle. What I was going to suggest you do, I'll unmute you, and if you like, I can. If you'd like to kick it off with 1.2, we'll just go through a page, or we'll give or take a few times. I'm just going to see if I've got to cut my mic.
Okay, yeah, great. There is a lot of sound coming through. I just want to go over, just to recap what we talked about last week, and that was really the rise of the Soviet Union, the great advances that humankind made as a result of the Soviet Union, and how around the world marginalized people were able to develop their own independent movements and so on. So that was kind of part of what we discussed last week, but it was mostly about the rise of the Soviet Union and the impact that had around the world. And then, of course, some of the things that happen after as well. As a result of the manipulation within the Soviet Union itself, and of course the hugely external pressures from the Western world. So Caleb goes on to say, history does not march in a straight line. Zigzags and regressions often follow great advances. The progress of humanity can often be observed in patterns such as one step forward and two steps backwards. Between the moment when socialism as the 20th century incarnation of the city builders tendency was in ascendancy, and the situation facing the planet today is a period marked by many disasters and regressions. These setbacks have allowed the Atlanticist pathology to rebound and to mask itself in many new disguises. The result has been a high level of political confusion. The political compass that divided the Cold War era is now broken. Left and right are harder to define than ever before. A clear-headed analysis is needed in order to assess where we stand today in terms of the global economy and geopolitics. The clash between the city builders and the vandals persists, though the ideological division between the two camps is not as clear. Revolutionary intelligentsia and the broad masses. Among those in the world who call themselves leftist, socialist, communist, or Marxist, two distinct psychologies exist. No matter where in the world, you can always find a revolutionary intelligentsia. These are younger people of middle-class origin who become attracted to revolutionary ideas out of a desire to tear down an unjust world around them. The revolutionary intelligentsia is always a small minority within society. They are known for their boldness, courage, and their outrage at inequality. They strive to create chaos and disorder. In their youthful passion, they seek to dethrone oppressors and correct injustice with explosive displays of heroism. The Marxist movement certainly originated among such a revolutionary intelligentsia in Europe, but such sentiments long predate it. Before Karl Marx was even born, William Blake, the English poet, famously wrote, "I shall not cease from mental strife, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand until we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land." Such feelings of passion and rebellion among a privileged intellectual strata were key in toppling feudalism, not just in Blake's England, but all across Europe. Trotsky sought for the Soviet Union to be only a temporary military holdout in his fantasy of global permanent revolution. The revolutionary intelligentsia is wedded to a spiritual conception of a relentless struggle to create utopia despite all costs. Some of the most admired figures in world history, such as Joan of Arc and Che Guevara, seem to give voice to this mindset by choosing a life of struggle. However, for those who approach the question of historical progress scientifically, not merely romantically, a certain truth must be acknowledged. Though the revolutionary intelligentsia may be brave, forward-thinking, creative, and intelligent, it is not capable of giving birth to a socialist society. Socialist revolutions have always been made by the broad masses of people who turn to revolutionary and anti-capitalist ideas, motivated by very different desires. While revolutionary intelligentsia has always existed, no matter what the state of affairs in society, the broad masses of people generally avoid revolutionary and anti-capitalist politics. Only when economic hardship and war makes their lives increasingly less stable and society can no longer function in the old way, do the broad masses of the people take up history's challenge. In such times, they are forced by material conditions to examine the nature of the crisis and seek a way out. In times of great crisis, the millions who normally avoid politics and ideology will turn to socialists and revolutionaries for a solution.
The broad masses approach socialism with completely opposite desires from the revolutionary intelligentsia. The broad masses of people do not desire chaos. They turn to socialism because they see it as bringing order and stability. Socialism is appealing because it will ensure that they are no longer desperate, hungry, or living in great uncertainty. Socialism offers a hope, not for vengeance or some kind of cathartic uprising to correct injustice, but rather for reducing their pain and creating a more stable and safe world. The Bolsheviks won the support of the Russian people by offering peace, land, and bread, not by promising permanent revolution. Immediately following the revolution, Lenin insisted that a treaty withdrawing from the war be signed in order to keep the trust of the masses. The masses had supported the Bolsheviks due to their anti-war platform. The Bolsheviks had risen to power promising to end Russia's involvement in the First World War, redistribute land and raise the living standards, and they kept this promise. In China, Mao Zedong won the peasants and the broad masses of the Chinese people over, not with promises of storming heaven, but with talk of land to tiller, new democracy, and defeating the Japanese invaders. At the height of its strength during the 1930s depression, the Communist Party thoroughly understood this. As Americans were unemployed and hungry, William Z. Foster proposed a revolutionary way out of the crisis as the slogan for his 1932 presidential election. In the 1940 election, the CPUSA ran Earl Browder for president, with an even more explicit articulation of these sentiments in his slogan, "The Way Out." Both of these electoral campaigns received the votes of tens of thousands of people, despite being driven from the ballot in various states. The strength of the CPUSA during the height of its power in the 1930s was its unemployment councils and labour unions that provided relief for the desperately poor while advocating on their behalf in local community struggles. In 1936, an article that was widely hostile to the CPUSA, published in Fortune magazine, admits the source of the party's increasingly popular at the time. Not long ago, a government official toured the country, penniless and clothed in tatters, to see for himself how unemployment relief was being handled. He learned a great deal. Even the communists taught me something, he told reporters. I learned that the power of the communists is gained principally because they will listen to people who are down and out and will work for them and fight for them.
The Black Panther Party of the 1960s and 70s also drew its strength from providing services to those in need. After expelling Elridge Cleaver's faction that advocated ultra-left adventurism and violence, the organisation shifted towards the community service. The Black Panthers followed the examples of successful revolutionary organisations around the world, launching a free breakfast program, healthcare clinics, and other programs described as survival pending revolution. The typewritten statement launching the Free Breakfast for Children program in 1969 and appealing for financial support issued from the National Office of the Black Panther Party explained its purpose. One of the greatest forms of oppression is hunger. Children must be fed, and free breakfast for school children is another key to liberation by halting the staunch form of oppression, hunger. One who looks into the face of a hungry child knows that his need is immediate. One can delay in asking a face with a cold heart. A child does not understand hunger surveys made by the government, but he can relate to a full stomach every morning. While these words may sound mild, the US government realized how potentially revolutionary this program was. In May of 1969, shortly after the program was launched, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover issued a special memo. He pointed out how effective the program was in winning mass support for Black nationalism and communism amongst African Americans. Hoover wrote, "The BCP, the Breakfast for Children program, promotes at least tacit support for the Black Panther Party among naive individuals, and what is more distressing, it provides the Black Panther Party with a ready audience composed of highly impressionable youths. Consequently, the Breakfast Children's Program represents the best and most influential activity going for the Black Panther Party, and as such is potentially the greatest threat to efforts by authorities to neutralize the Black Panther Party and destroy what it stands for." To those who seriously study the history of revolutionary politics, two things are abundantly clear. What attracts the broad masses of people to socialist ideas in times of crisis, and what captures the imagination of the revolutionary intelligentsia are distinctly different. Around the world, effective revolutionary organizations that ultimately succeed in taking power win support from those who are suffering and want a new order that will protect them from capitalism's irrationality. This reality of two different motivations behind revolutionary anti-capitalism has become apparent to the Western intelligence agencies. In their efforts to beat back socialism and secure Wall Street's domination of the planet, open and direct efforts are used. Manipulation of the revolutionary intelligentsia is to separate it from the socialist countries of the world, and the masses of the American people have completely redefined politics in our contemporary world.
All right. Chapter 1.2.2, the synthetic left. The CIA's program known as the Congress for Cultural Freedom, in brackets CCF, was created explicitly for the purpose of manipulating left-wing artists and intellectuals. This was done in order to weaken the influence of the Soviet Union. CIA's website boasts of this program and it was one of its most successful operations. The CIA's article summarising its CCF program goes into great detail about how the operation was conducted. To lead the program, Sidney Hook, a New York Trotskyite professor, surprise, was selected. The program involved covertly funding and circulating a publication called Partisan Review, which highlighted intellectuals like Susan Sontag, Irving Howe, Isaac Dusher, George Orwell, and others. The idea was to cultivate intellectuals and leftists who were critical of Western capitalism but who strongly opposed anything, and that is anything, that would challenge it on the global stage. The website boasts that the Congress of Cultural Freedom program was carried out by a cadre of energetic and well-connected staffers willing to experiment with unorthodox ideas and controversial individuals, if that was what it took to challenge the communists at their own game. Through the CCF program, the CIA covertly funded the work of Jackson Pollock, a painter who refused to depict people, scenery, or even clear shapes, but simply splattered paint onto his canvas. His abstract and modern art was viewed as a celebration of Western freedom. It was contrasted with the propaganda art of the Soviet Union, in which the artists sought to espouse a political message. Among academia, the Frankfurt School and neo-Marxism were pushed forward with the covert help of US intelligence agencies. Herbert Marcuse, who had been employed by the US State Department and US intelligence agencies, became the selected academic spokesperson for the New Left. Efforts were made to portray Stalinism and the pro-Soviet Communist parties as authoritarian and out of touch. Sidney Hook is quoted as saying, "Give me $100 million and 1,000 dedicated people, and I will guarantee to generate such a wave of democratic unrest among the masses, yes, even among the soldiers of Stalin's own empire, that all his problems for a long period of time to come will be internal. I can find the people." The efforts to control the revolutionary intelligentsia and separate it from the revolutionary movements across the planet went beyond academia and leftism. Much like the Roman emperors, in order to control their populations, imported cults and exotic gods from across the empire, the US intelligence agency began importing primitive sects from Asia. CIA Director John Foster Dulles wrote, "The religions of the East are deeply rooted and have many precious values. Their spiritual beliefs cannot be reconciled with communist atheism and materialism. That creates a common bond between us, and our task is to find it and develop it." The CIA followed Dulles' instructions, and some of the most primitive Eastern cults were not only supported in Asia as they worked against the Chinese Communist Party, but brought to the USA to flourish among intellectuals who might have otherwise become Marxists.
The Dalai Lama's regime in Tibet was particularly repressive, with serfdom, executions, torture, and mutilations. During the 1950s, hundreds of thousands of people died in the United States, airdropped Buddhist monks with stockpiles of weapons into the mountains of Tibet to foment civil war against the People's Republic of China. The Dalai Lama's oldest brother, Gyalo Thondop, was among those who killed communist literacy volunteers and burned healthcare clinics in the hope of re-establishing the feudal kingdom. The efforts of the CIA to popularize the Dalai Lama and his Tibet separatist movement are documented in the book The CIA's Secret War in Tibet, published by the Heritage Foundation. Yet to American audiences, the Dalai Lama is presented as a man of peace, and it is leftists and liberals who are among his adoring flock. This is particularly ironic when it is recognized that prior to the Cold War, the Tibetan kingdom was a fetish of right-wing extremists. The book 7 Years in Tibet, considered a sacred text among Western advocates of Tibet's separatism, was written by Heinrich Harrer, a card-carrying member of Hitler's SS. Rightist intellectuals Julius Evola and the Nazi regime itself praised Tibetan society under the Dalai Lama's rule for how authoritarian and traditional it was. Under the iron grip of the Dalai Lama, who functioned as an ancient god king, no strikes or protests seemed to exist. Tibet's admirers in the 1930s saw the ancient kingdom that opposed science and maintained serfdom as the fascist ideal of a natural order. Abhay Charanvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami was the first of many Indian gurus to be brought to the United States. In 1966, he established the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, commonly known as the Hare Krishna movement. The organization actively recruited young peace activists, students, teenage runaways, and other demographics that commonly make up the revolutionary and intelligentsia to a right-wing brand of Hinduism. Many other mystics and gurus who are considered to be far-right extremists and fanatical anti-communists in India trickled into the United States. In India, these religious teachings were associated with massacres of Muslims, assassinations of trade unionists, child marriage, and the caste system. These sects generally opposed any efforts to correct social injustices, arguing simply that the poor should live a humble life in the hope of being reincarnated into a better position. Those who aligned themselves with those most right-wing and authoritarian elements in India were carefully selected to become favored teachers among peace activists and left-wingers in the United States. The Hare Krishna movement became a staple of anti-war rallies. In addition to anti-communist politics and Eastern cults, the use of narcotics has also become an aspect of left-wing activity in Western countries. The revolutionary movement around the world had always fought to liberate working people from the horror of addiction. Wiping out the scourge of heroin and opium is one of the Chinese Communist Party's greatest achievements. The CPUSA forbade its members from using drugs, and many socialist organizations in US history have even discouraged the drinking of alcohol. Marxists have generally seen drug addiction as a horrific scourge of capitalism, in which people turn to substances in order to numb their pain. Marx famously compared organized religion to opium, saying it was the heart of a heartless world and the soul of a soulless condition. However, covert efforts by the US government were aimed at cultivating a synthetic left and preventing the rise of any effective socialist movement. This reversed the long-standing position among Marxists and socialists. During the early 1960s, the CIA launched a program called MK Ultra. They began to conduct experiments and distribute hallucinogens to college students. In the places where young people were opposing the Vietnam War or marching for civil rights, LSD, marijuana, heroin, and cocaine always seemed to be present. Dr. Timothy Leary was a fired Harvard psychology professor. He traveled across the United States urging young people who protested the Vietnam War or marched for civil rights to use narcotics. His slogan was tune in and tune out. Tune in, turn on, drop out. And he became a national figure. He spoke on many college campuses and appeared frequently on national TV.
On August the 17th, 2010, the retired Fidel Castro devoted one of his columns in Cuba's daily newspaper, Grama, to quoting the work of Lithuanian writer Daniel Estulin. Castro's column described fascism in the United States. Both in the United States and in Europe, the big outdoor rock concerts were used to stop the increasing discontent among the population. According to recently released CIA documents, in brackets thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, Alan Jules purchased over 100 million doses of LSD, almost all of which flooded the streets of the United States during the late 1960s. Thousands of graduate students served as guinea pigs. Soon they were synthesizing their own acid. The overwhelming majority of anti-war protesters went into SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, on the basis of outrage at the developments in Vietnam. But once again, in the environment defined by the Tavistock Institute's psychological warfare experts, their sense of values and their creative potential went up in a cloud of hashish smoke. The Malthusian concept of overpopulation and the belief that scientific progress is an affront to Mother Nature has also slipped into leftist discourse. While environmental problems and climate change are certainly a reality, the answer is obviously more scientific progress, not less. New sustainable energy sources must be developed and utilised. The economy must be controlled in order for resources to be used in a logical way in line with long-term plans, not a short-term interests of individual capitalists. However, this is not the belief of most activists who call themselves environmentalists and ecologists. Rather than calling for a rational state-run economy and scientific progress in order to overcome global warming, the dominant voices in the green movement tend to look backward. Among leftist circles, one often now finds the belief that human beings are a cancerous tumour on the planet eating up precious resources. The neo-Malthusian voices that speak in the name of environmentalism now call for drastically reducing living standards and the human population. Many great infrastructure projects in the developing world would have been stopped in the name of ecology. One of the central beliefs of many within the current that can accurately be described as a synthetic left is a rejection of historical progress. While the political designations of left and right can be traced back to the French Revolution and the very concept of historical progress itself, so much has been distorted. This distortion is not accidental, but has been documented to be the result of intentional work by intelligence agencies.
Susan Sontag's new definition of fascism. Through covert efforts, the revolutionary intelligentsia has not only been rendered harmless to the Western system, but it has essentially been hijacked by it. Rather than acting as a champion of working class people against the rich and powerful, the synthetic left has largely become a battering ram serving neoliberalism and the efforts of the international financial oligarchy. This is not only true within the United States, but also on the international arena. Today, US interventions are promoted with liberal-sounding language. Countries are invaded to liberate the women. Sanctions are imposed on countries out of supposed concerns for the rights of the LGBTQ community. US media portrays the activists covertly funded to topple anti-imperialist governments as Guevara-esque freedom fighters. Conversely, the independent and anti-imperialist governments are represented as cold, mechanical tanks, inhuman machines ruthlessly crushing individuals and their dreams of freedoms. And their dream of freedom. In the commonly used propaganda formula, the Western world is associated with freedom, consumerism, and a lifting of restrictions. The anti-imperialist governments are equated with the fictional society in George Orwell's 1984. Cultivating this narrative involved a careful restructuring of how progressive and socialist-orientated people viewed the world. A key part of this has been redefining the nature of fascism and obscuring the fact that the USA and the Soviet Union were allies in the fight against Nazi Germany. In 1935, Bulgarian Georgy Dimitrov, the secretary of the Communist International, defined fascism as the open terrorist dictatorship of the most reactionary, most chauvinistic, and the most imperialist elements of the financial capital. Fascism has always been understood by Marxists to be a form of right-wing terrorism and violence used to carry out mass repressions in a time of political crisis. Fascism often represents the Marxist phenomenon of Bonapartism. Bonapartism requires that capitalists suppress not only the workers and the oppressed, but also members of their own class in hopes of restoring order amid ongoing turmoil. As the revolutionary intelligentsia became co-opted and prevented from being a force of opposition to Western capitalism, a new definition of fascism emerged. Presently, the political orientation has become so confused that young leftists working to topple revolutionary and anti-imperialist governments on behalf of Wall Street and London will somehow believe they are engaging in anti-fascist heroism like the communists of the 1930s. The pseudo-leftist intellectual Susan Sontag was the most explicit in redefining fascism to serve the global financial elite. Sontag, who was first published in the CIA-funded Partisan Review magazine, famously proclaimed in 1982, "Communism is fascism, successful fascism, if you will. Communism is in itself a variant, the most successful variant of fascism." She made these statements at a rally in support of the Solidarity movement in Poland, in which Roman Catholic dock workers helped to topple the Marxist-Leninist government.
Much of Sontag's work drew heavily from Karl Marx's teachings about capitalism, the origins of private property and the family, including his critiques of Western society. Ultimately, she rejected all aspects of Marxism other than these. To Sontag, the only acceptable non-fascist application of Marxism is as a mechanism for deconstruction. She is celebrated widely among pro-modern leftists and liberals. Sontag's analysis is presented in essays like her piece Fascinating Fascism, published in 1975 in the New York Review of Books. In her analysis, fascism is essentially anything that seeks to construct, build and unify. In her famous essay examining Nazi collaborator Leni Riefenstahl's photographic exhibit of African tribes, she defines the photographs as fascist for the following reasons. It is generally thought that National Socialism stands only for brutishness and terror, but this is not true. National Socialism, more broadly, fascism, also stands for an ideal, or rather ideals, that are persistent today under the other banners. Ideal of life as art, the cult of beauty, the fetishism of courage, the dissolution of alienation in the ecstatic feelings of the community. The family of man. Although the Nuba are black, not Aryan, Riefenstahl's portrait of them evokes some sort of larger themes of Nazi ideology. The contact between the clean and the impure, the incorruptible and the defiled, the physical and the mental, the joyful and the critical. According to Sontag, it doesn't matter if one explicitly preaches hate or authoritarianism, because any effort to build a stable, prosperous society is fascist. Sontag lists characteristics of fascist aesthetics as including extravagant effort and the endurance of pain, the massing of groups of people, the turning of people into things, the multiplication and the replication of things and grouping of people and things around in an all-powerful hypnotic leader figure of force. The fascist dramaturgy centers on the orgiastic transactions between mighty forces and their puppets, uniformly garbed and shown in swelling numbers. Its choreography alternates between ceaseless motions and a congealed static, viral posing. Fascist art glorifies surrender, it exalts mindlessness, it glamorizes death. She explains mass athletic demonstrations, a choreographed display of bodies, are a valued activity in all totalitarian countries, and the art of the gymnast, so popular now in Eastern Europe, also evokes recurrent features of fascist aesthetics, the holding in or confining of force, military precision. Just want to make a comment there. Was she on drugs? Explaining her belief that communism is a variant of fascism, she states, in both fascist and communist politics, the will is staged publicly in the drama of the leader and chorus. According to Sontag's analysis, which represents very clearly the feelings of the synthetic postmodern left, any attempt to organise society and unleash collective human brilliance is fascist at its core. Sontag's logic follows that because of what the Soviet Union and China have achieved in terms of raising living standards and transforming the lives of millions, it is the most successful and therefore the most dangerous form of fascism. In Sontag's view, Marxism-Leninism is the equivalent of fascism because communists, like fascists, believe in right and wrong. Communists, like fascists, are motivated to support the cause of right in politics and encourage extravagant effort from their adherents, fetishizing courage. Communists, like fascists, form political parties and mass movements dedicated to their ideas. Communists, like fascists, seek to create ecstatic feelings of community and achieve the dissolution of alienation. Communists, like fascists, seek to create a family of man and breaking away from the central thesis of Western liberalism, that individualism must prevail above all else. To Sontag, the differences between fascists and communists do not seem to matter. The fact is that fascists seek to restore order and preserve social hierarchies with mass violence and terror. Communists seek to control the means of production and use science to advance human progress. This is conveniently overlooked by her. I'll finish off this last bit. According to the synthetic postmodern left, ideology itself is the problem. Concepts like right and wrong and morality must be abandoned. Everything should be considered a clash of different narratives, shades of grey. All efforts towards social progress and collectivism must be rejected as totalitarian, and all efforts to deconstruct or disrupt civilization must be celebrated as liberation. In essence, the synthetic left has purged Marxism and left-wing politics of the progressive, city-building tendency. Leftism, for the postmodernists, is purely a vehicle for deconstruction. It is in essence vandalism, dressed in progressive clothing. We'll leave it there, and we'll continue on next week with further chapters, the rise of the colour revolutions, etc. We'll have the questions and just general discussion. On me. Okay, well, questions we've got on the, first of all, from that first part, revolutionary intelligentsia and the broad masses. And I think we were talking, which one? You take yourself off mute if you like.
Yeah, I was just, there's a bit of feedback. I don't think I can be off. Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah. All right. So there's a number of questions in this talking about the revolutionary intelligentsia and the broad masses. I thought that we could start with the question of, well, let's answer the question of who are the revolutionary intelligentsia today? And who are the broad masses? And which one do you define more with, and why? Do we have a revolutionary intelligentsia in Australia?
I don't think we really do. I don't think we do. We've got academics in the sense where, if you're looking at that way within the universities, and may study some Marxism, but usually it's they either distort it or they're there to criticise it. They're not revolutionary by any means. I don't think we've had a particular type of revolutionary intelligentsia for such a long time, I'm led to believe. I could be completely wrong. I mean, if anyone who's watching wishes to comment on that, I was led to believe, but it doesn't necessarily have to be university academia either. It could be many other. It could be many other type of think tank. It could be a particular type of many commentators and that. I don't think actually we've got an intelligentsia as such as that as revolutionary now in this country so much. I think we're quite dependent. So I think that's one of the things. But who are the broad masses? Well, I'd be saying actually just your common people, your common working people, or people that are looking for work at the moment because they're either in lockdown or lost their jobs because of this whole crisis. But that would be the common broad masses. Which do you identify with? Well, I actually do identify with broad masses because I'm part of it. I mean, I've worked for a living. Yes, I might be an organiser now in my respective union, but I'm actually from the rank and file too, so I'm from that. I live amongst the community, and yeah, at the end of the day, that's where I identify with more.
Absolutely. What would be a good revolutionary? So the next question is, what would be a good revolutionary slogan? Like peace, land, and bread was in the Soviet Union. The Bolshevik used that slogan to gain the support from the masses. So what would be a good slogan in an Australian context, do you think, Dave?
Yeah, well, it'd have to be one that's related for us and what the people are demanding. And it's obviously something that offers stability and nation building, if you want, or rebuilding. Something that'd be inspiring as well, nothing boring. And yeah, nothing just with like a boring slogan and that. And it can't be just going smash this, smash that, and oppose this and oppose that and whatever else. I think people want something like a program put forward that they can be obviously motivated to organise around as well. I mean, obviously, I also like the term, we need a government of action, fights for working people, and that's a very good one to have. But what we can do as well, maybe look at something that's quite relevant, that's completely on everyone's lips at the moment, and obviously want to have something around with a, just what we call it. We call it job security, but it would be how would you put it? A proper living standard, etc. House over our heads, Yeah, I know, because back in many years ago after World War II, it was like full employment for all, and you had all that stability, and people had those certain demands, full employment, housing, etc., which actually formed the basis of the struggle. So there'd have to be something based around that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, we make a lot of slogans. The left tends to make a lot of slogans, and they tend not to mean anything, or they kind of fall short of the mark. But I think the whole question of democracy is something that we really need to consider. What is democracy? We should have the right to participate in the building of this society, and unfortunately we don't have that right under capitalism. And we could say jobs for all. One of the things I think we should be fighting towards or struggling towards is a shorter work week. And a shorter work week means that people have a work-life balance. Australians are working way more hours than some countries around the world, where and a lot of those hours are unpaid. So a shorter work week would solve unemployment, and create a society where people have an ability to participate in the building of their communities and in the building of society.
Yeah.
Because right at the moment we don't have time. We just simply don't have time. And, go ahead.
Yeah, just on that with the shorter work week, and it should be a shorter work week, and no loss in pay either. The fact is now casual and part-time work has increased. Now it's out past full-time work because of what's happened, the situation with lockdowns and the crisis of capitalism, which was fast-tracked by COVID, even more so, and people's economic uncertainty. There's a lot of economic uncertainty out there, and that could be part of a core fundamental in fighting for that, and finding some sort of a change there as well. So it obviously has to be something like that, because people are, for those who are working excessive hours, and some are not even recognised for some of their pay either, not recognised for some of their work, they're not getting paid for it. So it's all this. It's all these contradictions that are thrown in there that we could put around a few key demands. As what Alia quite correctly put out, systematic change. It has to be part of a system, but there's going to be some achievable goals we can campaign around it.
Absolutely. And so that leads on to the next question. That is, would a socialist democracy in Australia be any different than a capitalist democracy? And if so, how so?
Well, under a capitalist democracy, what we live under here is parliamentary type democracy, but profits reign in command. Right, every policy that's put through wasn't the benefit of the common population. It's there for the benefit to maintain profits and to increase profit even further. Profits remain in command. And under a socialist one, where all the banks, the factories, the big industries, the transport systems will be organised around a centralised plan for the common good of the public, of the population. Where at the moment it's not. It's under the anarchy of production to make further and further profit. Food's not grown to feed us. Food's grown to make profit. Same housing's built not for there to house us all, but it's there to make profit. Nothing happens unless profit is made. And under a socialist system, that would be a complete fundamental change the way we go about things. People will be provided with housing, so we don't have to need to worry about homeless anymore. People will be fed. Food will be grown so it generally meets our needs. It won't be wasted as such, because apparently under capitalism it gets wasted because they can't make profit out of it. If they can't sell it, it gets destroyed. And that's what we see, all the empty skip bins, full overflowing skip bins. You see all this food getting thrown out in the tip. And interesting, when this trade stoush with China has happened, and someone said, basically on lamb and beef, someone said, we're putting a tariff on it. And some people are making comment, oh, well, this or the price of meat and lamb will drop. No, wrong, it won't. In fact, all that excessive meat will be destroyed. It'll be either buried or burnt or turned into something else, probably not blood and bone, etc. It won't be turned into actually so we can afford cheap meat. And this is what happens. Same with milk. The same thing, overproduction. That ain't actually. We won't get cheap prices for milk. It all gets dumped. Exactly. So anything that's it's what they've drawn up on under a socialism, it'd be a completely different thing. We would be able to actually meet the people's needs, and a little further under capitalism, it's where profits reign supreme, and that's what is the fundamental difference between it all. It's not about saying, oh, well, I'm voting for this person or having my say. That's not what democracy. Democracy, it lies within deep what the economic system is, and obviously, yeah, we get to vote at a ballot box, but we actually don't participate in all levels of government either. So, but under socialism, you get to actually participate in all levels of society as well.
Yeah. I think people are under the illusion that we go to the ballot box and we elect leaders, and that makes us a democracy, and that somehow these are other countries that are anti-imperialist and striving to be independent countries, free of capitalism, that somehow they're not democratic. And yet when you delve deeper into their systems, you find that their democracy starts at very much a grassroots level. And so they have participation in their communities, they have participation in their factories, they have then they go up to a higher level, and they keep building and building and building from the grassroots levels right up to the top, their forms of democracy. And yet we manage to go to the polls once every 4 years and elect a leader, and we around the world we champion that as some kind of democracy, and scathing of other people's democracies. But I think you were right when you were saying that democracy represents class. And so the type of democracy that we have in Australia, in the US, in New Zealand, in the Western world, the type of democracy that we have there is representative democracy. Who does it represent? It represents the ruling class. It's their system. It's their economic system. For every economic system that's developed, a political system has developed alongside it. And so, when we had feudalism, when we had the kings and queens in control, it was a feudal economy. They were paying taxes all to the kings and queens and so on. And that was an economic system combined with a political system. Under capitalism, we have the representation of capital in parliament. They don't represent the ordinary people. They do not represent workers. We have to somehow struggle to understand this concept that the parliament that we have at the moment in Australia is a parliament that represents capital. It doesn't matter if we elect Labor, it doesn't matter if we elect Liberal, it doesn't matter if we elect the Greens. As long as they are managing the system of capital, as long as they are managing capital, they will survive in that parliamentary system. As soon as they want to change anything within that parliamentary system, they will be eradicated. They will be got rid of. There will be a coup of some sort. And we saw that with the Whitlam government. So we have to stop kidding ourselves and thinking that somehow we live in a democracy just because our mass media keeps using the word democracy, democracy, democracy. If they tell us often enough, maybe we'll start to believe it. But that's the truth of the matter, is we do not live in a democracy. And so socialism, if we see that, if we understand that an economic system has a rival political system or a system that will manage that economic system, then let's look at what socialism is. Well, socialism is a socialized economy. So who's going to run a socialist economy, a socialized economy? It's going to be the workers. So there's going to be a representative democracy of the workers. Because the economic system will be representative of the workers, or of the it's a socialized economy. So
Yep.
I think we've got to somehow, we've got to get that idea out there into the masses as well. So I think democracy is democracy in terms of that sloganeering. Democracy is a key thing. And then I remember years ago, and I'm just going to make this one last point. Sorry, but I remember years ago they. I think it was the Nationals. They had a slogan that said, "Keep the bastards honest."
Democrats. Yeah.
Democrats, right. So as though, well, for one, they're telling us that they're lying bastards up there in Parliament. They're telling us exactly what we already know, that they are liars and cheats up there, and that somehow we've got to keep them honest. Well, that's that's them telling us their own system, and then we've got to find a way to struggle against that system.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a couple of points, there. I mean, if for those that try to actually get trying to achieve fundamental change through the parliamentary process, we've seen it. Whitlam wanted to take Australia into its own independent course. That was a big no-no against British banks and American capital, and there was the CIA quiet coup behind to get rid of him by many other forces. And I'll admit one name that was actually right behind that was right onto it, the head of the trade union movement at the time, Bob Hawke, the CIA's main man in Australia. It was also complicit. And actually just seen it recently too, what happened with Rudd when they kicked him out and put Julia Gillard in. There were some phone calls from the US consulate to some respective figures, both in the Labor Party, and that do something about Rudd because he's getting a little bit too close to China. Do something, or we'll do it for you, basically. And they went, no problem, sir. And lo and behold, that's what happened. And then straight away the next day, you saw the groveling and all the crawling up to the US President Obama. Oh my God, it was sickening. And common people could not see that. It had me particularly worried you saw that. But even I think in the history, our wartime leader John Curtin, the time before he died in office, he actually wanted to steer Australia on an independent course and develop its own economy and that. And basically, he was threatened. Not by the opposing enemy forces at the time, be it Imperial Japan or Nazi Germany. No, he was actually threatened by America. We're going to be in very big economic trouble. He died while he was still in office, so he wasn't able to see what the changes he wanted to put through. So it just comes to show you all the shady stuff that happens behind the scenes. It happens, and it's very true. And the other point I just wanted to make with the recent rallies on the weekend, against lockdown. Now, when I'm hearing the terms about freedom, I'm just thinking, freedom from what exactly? Freedom for whom? For which class? And the fact is it freedom to do exactly what exactly? There's no actual clear matter. It's just clearly shouting out no thing. Because I'm going to ask the question: how can you be free if you're facing unemployment, poverty? How can you be free if you're going to be losing your home or possibly a foreclosing on your mortgage? How can you be free if you're going to be turfed out into the streets? How can you be free just trying to make ends meet day in, day out? How can you call that being free? You can't be free. That's it. You're locked into the system. And it's like exactly what there was pointed out. Hunger is oppression. Exactly, poverty is oppression. And that's what exactly is happening here. So when they're going on about freedom from what exactly? They're going, from oppression. No. Yeah, the real oppression is happening through economic uncertainty and unemployment, the threat of unemployment and poverty, etc. And that's where the real threats are coming from. All right, we'll continue. I was going to get
actually, I know. There's a lot going on at the moment, but just on this whole thing about democracy within our parliament as well, and you mentioning our Labor leaders and our governments being directly connected to the American, what is it called, the White House, the red phone, is it? They used to have a red phone. They used to talk about.
Hotline.
The hotline, straight to America. Well, WikiLeaks, and here's how democracy works in the Western world is, WikiLeaks was given documents to show how our politicians, before they get elected, have to go and front up to the US Embassy for the US Embassy's approval. before they get elected. So they are, our politicians are being co-opted by America. It's decided that they're okay to be elected, so therefore, they're given the rubber stamp. And WikiLeaks has exposed this, and of course, this is one of the reasons that Julian Assange is in jail. And so, our democracy is, well, if we don't like you, we're going to.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
The illusion of democracy is something we, like you say, that we have to overcome. So, brilliant.
Yeah. And look, Luke has asked a very interesting question here, and I think it's always leaded. I think we've always been afraid to ask that. How do you think the system will change if we can't go through Parliament? And I think there's a few things how it will change. It's obviously, I would always say the system will change if we'd start taking matters and becoming organised and prepared to take our own destiny back in our own hands instead of trying to rely on a politician to pull us through, for starters. It'd have to be through either community assemblies, if the communities, your neighbourhood assemblies. There has to start from the grassroots again, build up. It can't be just from a top-down structure. It'd have to be built from the ground up. It won't be look, we can learn a lot from the previous models of the 20th century. I mean, Soviets existed well before the Russian Revolution. And that was worker councils of deputies, workers and soldiers councils of deputies, and they helped organise common, poor, working people, the broad masses of the people together. And when Lenin famously said, all power to the Soviets, and that's what he meant, that type of structure. How would it look like in Australia today? It won't be identical to that. It'd be our own distinctive thing. I like to say socialism with Australian characteristics. It'd be our own distinct organisation. How would that look like? Well, I can't give a definite answer what it would look like, but it won't be achieved by just, obviously, if we can't go through Parliament. When we've actually said when we run candidates for Parliament, yes, it's still vitally important because we can get the message out there, get our message, and now that's why we get in touch with a lot more people as well. We can reach out to a lot more people, but at the same time too, actually expose the system for what it really is to uphold and maintain the rule of profit. It's not there to actually benefit the vast majority of all of us. So that's, and I think that's something. There's something very vital I think we should be looking at. And you've just mentioned also Bolivarianism, and yes, that's obviously, Venezuela is obviously we can look at doing things differently. Just in Peru, just recently with Peru Libre being elected in, and they've got a massive, great program that they've mobilised people to around as well. So it's not a matter of just having a policy and trying to implement it by law. We actually use it as a mobilisation. Mobilising the population for around, be it rebuilding, reforestation. Actually, I'm surprised there's no mobilisation banding people together to deal with a pandemic. So how we can actually do things instead of just locking down, we can look at doing other things as well to support each other. But that's I won't get into that because that's a huge discussion tonight, and I know we can get right off track. But that just gives you something we can learn from those other countries, even the Cubans and Vietnamese, etc. We learn from all that, and we don't have to actually replicate what they're doing and completely carbon copy because of our own particular conditions we have here in this country is remarkably different from everywhere else. All right, I think we better move on to the next because I'm just aware of time as well. It's nearly 8 o'clock. Did you just want to follow up about the healthcare programs or moving on with all the next ones?
Yeah. Can you mute, Dave? Yeah, beautiful. I think that question does lead on to the next one, which is why was the free breakfast and free healthcare program and the free healthcare programs created by the Black Panthers, why were they so successful? And how can we set up community programs like this ourselves? So I think that question of if we can't rely on Parliament, then how can we change our society? And I think this question kind of answers it in terms of the fact that we need to develop community programs that look after ourselves. And we start at that level, and then we gain knowledge and we gain experience about how to run things for ourselves. we almost set up an alternative economy and an alternative government. We become self-reliant, we become self-governing through our community organisations and so on. And in that way, we can progress on to becoming, to moving on to taking over the structures of society. But along the way, we have to develop a program that says, what are we fundamentally needing to do in this society to make it better? And along the way, develop that program. But the importance of starting at the grassroots level, at the community programs and so on, I don't think they can be understated. And part of the problem that we have in Australia is that we have a social welfare system. We have a welfare net that basically has disempowered us over the course of the last 200 years. It's not only disempowered us as workers, it's disempowered Indigenous people as well. It's disempowered people that come into our communities, because welfare takes away our need to support each other. I'm not saying that welfare is a bad thing, but I'm just saying in this context, in this whole, in the discussion about how can we develop these community programs, welfare is something that is a little bit disempowering, and it gets in the way of us being able to do it. Because we look at our neighbours and say, well, they're on the dole, they're all right. You might see a house full of kids that young teenagers that are all on welfare, and we think, bloody dole bludgers, they're having a time of their life. They don't even have to go to work, and so we get this kind of. We also get a divide and rule tactic. We get a divide and rule there. So those that go to work and paying the taxes, they hate those that are staying at home for whatever, because those taxes are going to them, and so we get a divide within the working class that makes it difficult for us to work together and really come together to build these community networks and community support bases and so on. But I think COVID is showing that they are ripping away all of those supports as quickly as they can, and it's going to be interesting coming out of COVID and seeing what Australia is going to look like, and I think it's going to be a very different country, if not very, very, very in debt, one or the other, or both.
Can I just add something on there? Because of that kind of question, and that's just a great way to actually organise this type of stuff on the ground for the benefit of everyone in the community, or all of us, in the community. And what I was understanding, it's the economic basis that needs to change. We can all get the superstructure, and we can run all these candidates into Parliament. We have this great, we've got all the right people in Parliament, that'll make change. But the superstructure, nothing will change, because the economic basis, where profits are still remain in command. So exactly what I'm just going to hold up there. I don't know if the audience can see it. What I've got is the economic base. That determines the superstructure, which in turn influences the economic base. So your economic base is where your capitalist modes of production, where profits remain in command. Your superstructure, your parliaments, your law courts, your military, police, education system, I dare say media as well, all that's all part of it there to enforce that economic base even further. This is where the actual change needs to happen on the economic base in order to actually completely change the superstructure, one that benefits society overall. And that's where the Black Panthers have realised that as well, about actually organising. It wasn't just simple for soup kitchens, it was actually organising proper feeding programs for young people, but even for poor neighbourhoods as well, and also free medical care as well, organising that and trying to actually helping those communities to actually organise themselves and empower those communities to look after themselves better. They're able to grow their own food, able to look after themselves medically as well, similar to actually what happened in China as well, when a lot of people had to go out in the countryside, but they helped organise communities there, because some were living in very primitive conditions, some very basic conditions and poor, and they were right out nowhere, but it helped to empower them for a start to look after themselves further and help them and teach them and that. So it was quite a dialectical thing. Well, the way to change it, and that way they learned to actually realise come to that conclusion and realise their power and assume the power. And that way we can start looking at setting up everything else to eventually replace the current superstructure and economic base we've got. So that's something just to always keep in mind. How's it going to happen here in Australia? Not quite correct, but that needs a collective discussion and decision-making and a collective action thrown into that. Wow, we could be on that for more hours yet. So, and you're right, for a better society, Luke, I totally agree there. Okay, I'll go on to the next one if you like. The synthetic left. Now, I know we just talked about this before, but I don't think we need to go for all the questions on that. I think we picked out a couple. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll actually ask that first question that has in there. What is authoritarianism? What is freedom? Is freedom dependent upon stability and development? Why or why not? I think I helped answer some of that before. And yeah, and I think sometimes, yes, freedom is dependent on stability and development. I mean, if you have chaos and pandemonium in that, this is where authoritarianism will come in to actually establish an order. But basically, when people are hungry and everything else, and there's chaos and pandemonium, an authority figure would come along and just establish order. We've seen that happen in history. Nazi Germany was that classic case in point, where the German population was suffering, and yes, the communists were ascending, and they were close to revolution. But that section, the ruling class, saw the threat, got behind the Nazis, went funding it, and formed the coup d'etat. And that's it, and crushed any form of dissent and formed a very intense order. That was that form. So that is on top of it. But we're going to understand principally what freedom is. It's not just a matter of doing what you want. That's a particularly stupid, actually, our concept of what freedom is. Freedom is the ability that we're able to participate in all levels of public life, to enjoy the cultural pursuits, and able to actually address our needs and live free from that dangers of any type of poverty. That everyone's lives are enriched. To me, that would be the freedom, not just a chaotic system, every person for themselves, and stuff you, Jack, I'm okay. That's not freedom.
Yeah, I think it needs to be said that definitely, as you said, Dave, that freedom is not about your individual pursuits and your ability to be an individual and do whatever you want. But definitely, it's dependent on us increasing production, on our ability to have so much abundance in our society that you don't actually have to go to work. You go to work because you want to go to work. Not because you have to go to work, not because you have a mortgage, not because you need to feed the kids or you need to put them through school, or because all of those things will be taken care of, because we have so much abundance in our society, because we have the ability to produce so much. We have 10 times the amount of food that we need right now to feed the entire world, and yet people are going hungry. But we need more of that so that we can free up ourselves from the drudgery of ordinary everyday life that really doesn't enhance our lives in any material way. It doesn't enhance our lives spiritually, that's for sure. Doing a lot of housework and doing a lot of gardening and doing a lot of this and a lot of that, on top of going to work for 40 hours a week, doesn't help us spiritually. But when we eliminate the need to go to work for 40 hours a week, and we want to pursue those things such as gardening or housework or painting or whatever it is that we want to do, and then we want to go to work for 2 or 3 hours a day because we want to contribute to our communities, we want to contribute to our society. But we don't have to go to work. We are free to do whatever we want because we have enough wealth in the country for everybody. And that's the crucial thing. So at the moment, we don't have that ability. We produce enough, but as you said earlier, Dave, if there's overproduction, they'll throw it down the sink rather than give it out to people. They'll destroy things rather than allow us to have them. We've got more houses that we could put everybody that's homeless in Melbourne here into houses and places to live, and still have empty houses left over, but they won't do that. So you know, it's redefining what we consider freedom, and thinking about things, you know, in terms of how much does our society need for our freedom, for us to have our freedoms, and we need to produce a lot more.
Yep. Now,
all right, so,
you go for it. Do you want to ask the question, or
I'll do it? Yeah.
Okay.
So Susan Sontag, she redefined fascism as essentially anything that is what was her words, Dave? I can't think of them at the moment. Anyway, we'll leave it there. But she equated fascism and communism as being equal to each other. And so, how do we push back against the war machine when it's used through progressive language? Which is kind of what she's saying. She's saying, well, communists use progressive language. The Nazis also use progressive language. They talk about the beauty, the cult of the beauty, and so on. So they use progressive language as well, and so does communism. So how do we push back against the war machine that's using that progressive language to invade other countries and so on?
I'll give you a classic example: Afghanistan. We're in there. You know, the original idea was supposed to go in Afghanistan is go after Osama bin Laden, right? But no, we're in there because we had to save the women, or we had to do, you know, get rid of the terrible Taliban and all this. And same with Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction. You know, Saddam was this terrible, towering figure, you know, and we have to get rid of them. You know, weapons of mass destruction. They used all this language. We're going in there for the good of humanity. And exactly, they've used it to try and justify every invasion after every invasion, and what they've left with is just destruction and instability for that population. We've seen it happen in Libya, where Libya had the highest standard of living anywhere in Africa, Northern Africa, and that where women had equal rights, and obviously they were moving forward. The reason why they were invaded because they didn't want to trade in US dollars anymore and establish their own North African bank and their own gold standard and develop their own. That's what happened. And same with everywhere else they've been trying. The US has been trying into it, and that's why we need to actually push back and expose the war machine for what it really truly is. It wasn't there to. Oh, that's right. The war on terrorism. That's the classic language and everything else, but it hasn't been a war on terrorism at all. All it does is create instability around the world. In fact, if they want to, what they've in fact is done the complete opposite, increased it, and turned the populations against them. They haven't come and won the hearts and minds to anyone at all. You know, putting trade. You know, what's the other one? Trade sanctions and all that, economic sanctions against countries and starving people. Well, that's a really great way to win the hearts and minds of that population over, isn't it? You know, but they don't like us. Oh, gee, we wonder why. So we can push against this the war machine when it's justified through progressive language and explain for what it is. And of course. Italy used certain languages and that, like Germany was under threat and we had to defend Germany. France hit us first. The Poland was about to, we had to do it. And then, the evil Soviet Empire, off we go. And all basically it was using it to try and justify to expand German imperialism even further. And that's what it was, to actually have Germany as the dominant imperial power of the world, not the rest of it, and that's what that comes about. But what happens? It needs to have some clear education and understanding, and a complete pushback to an exposure for what really is going on here. And I think one thing is we got advantage. We've got history on their side there. We've been proven correct on it. We got proved correct about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We're going to prove exactly about Libya and Syria, about everywhere else, Afghanistan, etc. So, I mean, you know, it's basically, and as things progress, we can push back. Yeah. Sorry, no, we're going to be along there.
No, that's fine. My point about that would be that we really need to see things from a class point of view. We have to see things from a working class position. So when they're using language like, well, we're going to war to free to emancipate the women of around the world, we need to push back against that in terms of, well, you're saying you're going to emancipate women, in these countries, but you're telling us to go and kill our brothers in those countries, our working class brothers in those countries. So how is that emancipating women when you're going to go and kill working class men? It's their progressive language disguised in war is really an attack on people, on the working class of other countries, and we need to oppose those wars, using through working class solidarity. It's wars are wars, and the people that most are affected by wars are the working class, and never do the imperialists invade countries for the good of the working class. They oppose it maybe for they say they're going in for certain sections of those societies, but they never go in to say that they're saving the working class from exploitation. Never.
Exactly. And exactly. We'll move on to the next one. That I think because we're just, as I said, we are wary of time. Why is Susan Sontag's definition of fascism incorrect? What is the actual definition of fascism? Well, obviously, we were reading that out before, I mean, that was like a well whacked out version of what she thought fascism was. Fascism is basically a force of brute terror, and that's basically a movement of brute terror and force, and represents a particular section of the capitalist class. They realise that capitalism is under threat, on the verge of it, so that particular section will move in to maintain it, and through systematic terror, brute terror, and force. Hitler's Germany the Nazi Germany was like that. Mussolini's Italy as well, but also too recent examples such as Pinochet's Chile. That's Chile under the leadership of Pinochet. We saw exactly that as well. That real Bonaparte type policies that are put in place, and they would have had to seek to destroy even other sections of the capitalist class in order to maintain that brute terror rule. And it's very few. Fascism is also very backward looking. It's very feudal as well. It believes in mysticism. But what it is, fascism is capitalism in decay. Well, I've heard the term fascism is capitalism in decay. It is basically capitalism in crisis. It needs to take off all illusions of democracy and show its true force, its terrifying force, and that's what we've seen. And fascism's ultimate aim is war and complete destruction. Well, that's its end result. Sorry, not aim, but its end result. So when she's trying to. When her definition of it is quite incorrect, and we're at least trying to give an actual definition of what fascism is. It's not to say that anyone in authority is a fascist. I think we've got not to use that, and I think with a lot of big lessons that everyone has to learn, don't use that term lightly or divorce from what the actual meaning of it is. It's like when people tend to use words that are quite divorced from their real meaning of what that is. And that's what fascism is. It's a movement of brute force and terror to maintain capitalist rule. And that's what it is.
Yeah, and I think as Caleb's put in the book here, the Georgy Dimitrov, the secretary of the Communist International, he defined fascism as the open terrorist dictatorship of the most reactionary, most chauvinistic, and the most imperialistic elements of finance capital. It's not an ideology. There's no such thing as a fascist ideology. There may be certain thoughts that we identify as being fascist, but that's not actually what fascism is. It's the open, most reactionary elements of finance capital, and the most open dictatorship of finance capital. So, if we say somebody uses, talks in a certain way, and we call them fascist. Well, no, that's not the case. It's the brutal force of finance capital, and as we go into a crisis, an economic crisis, which we are definitely facing in the coming years. We are going to see more and more struggle amongst the imperialists for control of finance capital, and you can be sure of that. Already in Sydney, they're talking about, and really this is only an element of it, but it's not. It's something to watch. They're talking about bringing the Australian Defence Force into Sydney to help monitor COVID case, in the areas where there's the most cases, as though people are running around purposely kind of breaking the law on COVID. There's elements of that, but I don't think it means. I really don't see that Australians are really out there to undermine the controls that we have in place to try and rid ourselves of COVID. But they're going to bring in the police. We've got a military man in control of our COVID vaccination program. Why is that? Why is our health department not looking after it? It's more than capable of doing that. I think that we should be very concerned about our erosion of democracy as a result of COVID, and also now about the way that they're using the military and even the police. And I've never heard it before about a demonstration, but the police are saying that if people come out in the streets and go out in the streets in Sydney this Saturday, that they are going to be brutal. And I don't think I've ever heard the Australian police say to demonstrators that they will be brutal against them. And so I think we have grounds for concern, both in Australia and internationally as well.
Yeah, and just on that, I mean, where they're using the military and the police lockdown in Sydney, it's in the southwestern and western suburbs of Sydney. They're regarded as hot zones, but the fact is, it's where the majority of the working class live. But you don't see the heavy military and police presence in the eastern suburbs, the North Shore, or the northern beaches of Sydney, or the Insular Peninsula, etc. You don't see where all the wealthy live. Oh, no. And guess what? It's going to be some fine weather in Sydney on this weekend. And guess where they're going to be? And they've been doing it a lot, going to the beaches, intermingling, playing basketball, doing all these great things because they're just too good for everything. The Premier didn't want to inconvenience them. Mind you, they've got the construction industry going, but how those workers are going to get to work when they're going to leave allowed to leave their own suburb? They're going to have to show passes and everything else just so they can get to work anymore. And now I understand COVID's real. It's, what's going on at the moment is real. But the fact is, it would have been a much better way. It's been in such an appalling manner how they've dealt with that in New South Wales. And of course, people's anger is going to rise. There's so much economic uncertainty now. And they're going to be, and what the ability is, they know that it's going to be rising unrest. Not to about lockdown and COVID-19. Most of them do believe it's real. They want to get vaccinated. But what they do want to have a look at is we've got stomachs to feed. We've got to provide housing. We've got to have all this to make ends meet, and you're depriving us of all this. So what's going to happen? They'll naturally they will retaliate back. They will fight back. They will respond back accordingly. And this is what they're actually looking for. And really, actually, a good close friend of mine and comrade of mine that does live in Sydney actually put the nail right on the head. He says the whole thing is there to actually disguise the actual crisis of capitalism itself. Capitalism was actually on the way down big time before COVID-19. COVID-19's just fast-tracked it. That's all it's done. It basically, without COVID, it'd be spiraling out of control now. But what they've done now is used a good opportunity to go, we can do this, put these measures in place, under the guise of trying to stop the spread and everything else. And people haven't got a problem about not stopping the spread. It's not the problem people have got. The problem people have got is the economic uncertainty and everything else, and how they're going to actually and how they're going to survive in the long run. And why is it they're copying the heavy military and police presence and not the ones who actually brought it into the country in the first place, the very wealthy, and all those have been enjoying the high life and everything else and able to do what they fucking well liked, and because the Premier didn't want to inconvenience them, So yeah, I think it's something we've always. There is a class struggle that's happening here. And we're seeing it. And unfortunately, it's spread for a lot of these communities, and some are migrant-based communities, but it's also cultural for them to be in large groups together. That's what their traditional family is. It's not a mother and husband, wife, and 2 children, it's actually quite a broad. Their family structure is quite bigger than what we traditionally are. And if they're not around that, they have a breakdown of that. So anyway, I won't go. That's way off going out of league, but that's what we're seeing now. And I'm just, as I said, we're at time. We've got a few minutes to go. Which goes on to the next question. Actually, we should ask, what is the difference between communism and fascism? Does fascism have anything in common with liberalism? Well, there is a fundamental big difference. I mean, well, say socialism, which is the lowest stage of communism. Communism is actually, eventually there's so much material abundance and everyone's able to be provided for that. There's no longer need a state that's required to enforce that anymore. It's a gradual withering away of the state. No society has achieved that so far. Let's be realistic about that at the moment. There's a certain society on the way there, but they're completely way off from achieving that at the moment. But what it is that's the fundamental difference. So we're actually all the industries, all the banks, the industries, transport systems, everything else is all organised around a central plan, like I've explained for what socialism is, and there's so much, and it's there provided for the public good. So much material good is abundance is provided, so they'll allow us to pursue our own cultural needs. And the further as the society advances, it goes to the higher stage of communism, where we no longer need a state to enforce it anymore, and we're able to live each according to his ability, each according to his need, is what Marx applied. When that question is with what we've said, that and fascism, like we've said before, is the brute dictatorship form of finance capital. It is capitalism in its most brute and terroristic way. It's a movement of force and terror to brute force and terror to enforce the rule of capitalism, and that's what it is. It is capitalism. And the final bit, does fascism have anything in common with liberalism? Certainly does. They are both cheeks of the same backside. And they are both there. Liberalism as well is a capitalist ideology to maintain it. That capitalism can be good. It's capitalism with the smiley face. It's there, but liberalism can be just as equally bad. It sometimes is the doorway to fascism. Liberalism can no longer answer anything and provide what we're seeing now. We've had 40 years of neoliberal economic policies that's now led to this situation. And that, everywhere, everyone's an individual, individualism and this whole thing, greed is good and all this. That's liberalism. This is what we're seeing. Liberalism is destructive. It destroys that community nature amongst people, our collective nature. And this is what we're seeing now. And when it descends into chaos and pandemonium, this also too gives the certain section of the capitalist class what we could be seeing now. Hopefully it don't, but what we're seeing now is bringing fascism. So yes, fascism and liberalism, they're the two cheeks of the same arse. Did you want anything to that?
Well, I think that just sums it up beautifully. And I think, and you saying that liberalism opens the door for fascism quite often. I think also that here in Australia, I think that it would be fair to say that that social democracy would play that role as well. So, we have to be very aware. Somebody asked the question about the parliamentary system and how we could, change the system if we can't use the parliamentary system. The real problem is that we can't rely on the parliamentary system to make those changes. So we have to come up with something different. We have to, because social democracy, the Labor Party, the Liberal Party, they will all work hand in hand against the working class taking power. So we have to come up with our own formations and understand that when there's a crisis developing in capitalism, and they do develop, it's not it's a symptom. It's something that has to happen under capitalism. It cannot be that capitalism doesn't have crises. It has crises of overproduction, and it goes through boom bust periods. It has to. It's not something that they can mitigate against. That it has to do that. Because of its very nature of the anarchy of production. So not sure where I was going with this, but just as a warning, and I guess that's because there's elections coming up. We know that there's going to be elections in Australia, and we know that people will be going. Already the Labor Party's looking like it could win. If we took it from the polls, that Labor's in front because of the chronic mishandling of the pandemic and so on, and just the Liberals' complete utter disregard for people in Australia. The possibility of the Labor Party winning, we need to be a bit concerned about that as well, because the Labor Party's got a history of not being particularly nice to the working class. And if any doors open to fascism, the Labor Party will be happy to open the doors to fascism if need be.
Yeah, that's right. As I said, that's where the doorway opens there. And actually, there's a good book. Actually, I recommend anyone if they would like to order. It's actually Social Democracy: The Enemy Within by Harpal Brar. Remember, he's one of the founding members of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. An excellent book. I would recommend go to their website. Just Google their name and Google their name. It'll go to their website and order that book. It's a fantastic read, and it goes right into in-depth detail about that. Yeah, the next one, the question I just put further on, I think, yes, here it is. Is liberalism or authoritarian? Why not? I think, yes, it can be, because basically, it can be. It is actually. It's not a matter, when we're talking about liberalism, there's also trade liberalism and liberalising the workforce and all this. We've seen it 40 years of economic neoliberalism that's happened, and it is authoritarian. If workers wish to collectively take industrial action, far more just to pursue a claim without going through this whole process through the courts and the commission, they are conferred up to fines of up to $20,000 or even greater. If they dare take on a multinational in a similar thing, Chevron tried to do this with the MUA by suing them for over $20 million for years ago. The certain actions they took, where the MUA on behalf of its members took action, they all took action to achieve an aim, and Chevron had them in court of law for it. That's just one of many. I can answer that now because it's on public record. It's there if you want to look at the transcripts, look it up yourselves. But this is liberalism. This is liberalism at its most. It's there to design to destroy the collective ability and consciousness and the collective power of the workers, not just by brute force like fascism would do it directly. It's an indirect method by using the time of the court of law and many other methods of trying to actually suppress workers' struggle and collective rule, and also destroy working class communities. Once the decisions might just say shut a big refinery or a steel mill down, good paying union jobs. Imagine the devastation that happens on the community there. And it is authoritarian. If the community dare do anything about it and fight anything, they could be up to a lot of trouble. You look at a lot of our free trade agreements, all this economic liberalism that's thrown in there, and all this free trade that's thrown in it. If we ever do have a government that stands up to it and says, no, you cannot do that. This will have a devastating effect on our community and regional communities especially. It might be a particular product that might be riddled with a particular pest. No, you can't bring that here. That government can be now sued from squillions of dollars, because we've actually stopped the flow of profit for that company stop the ability for that company to make even further profit. So I think we both understand that's what liberalism, yes, can be authoritarianism, can be authoritarian as well, and we've seen that as well. And we've seen people who've actually stood up to it through protests and that. Where mining companies get together to have their unsavoury conferences and come up with more unsavoury ideas how to stuff everybody and everything over. And there's all of a sudden a big protest out the side and they blockade the place. Guess what they go up to? Respect our authority. Whack! There's liberalism for you on the orders of those mining companies. So even that's starting to go into the fascism when it gets a lot more further. But it gives you a taste of it, what it is. So yes, liberalism can be authoritarian.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dave. Definitely. It's now 8:30.
Okay.
So I think that we should finish on that note and invite people to come back with us in the next 2 weeks at
Yep.
7 o'clock.
Yep. So it'll be 2 Thursdays from now. Yep.
Beautiful. And so that would be the 12th. I think around about the 12th of
we're right there.
August. The year is creeping away from us. 12th of August. Just so people who are listening, maybe from Melbourne here, there are the Julian Assange vigil outside Flinders Street. They happen on Friday evenings, every Friday at 6 o'clock, and it will be starting up again this Friday. So if you'd like to come down and say hello, that'd be wonderful. But I don't have anything else, but I thought I'd just mention that quickly, just in the face of talking about fascism and the attacks on the media. I think Julian Assange deserves a bit of support there.
Very good. All right. Well, look, thank you once again for everyone listening in tonight. Please like this, subscribe. Feel free to share it far and wide. And if you'd like to ever participate, send me a message. Just on it's a simple name, I'm David Fox. Just send me a Facebook Messenger, and I'll see if you'd like to be included in that further discussions. And I highly recommend actually ordering this book as well, because basically just you go the Centre of Political Innovation USA through their website, or even just Google it. That'd be fine. And also too, I highly recommend reading this book. It didn't take me long to finish this one about bread tubes, service imperialism by Caleb Maupin, many others, and they're actually a little bit more in depth to what the synthetic left and all these pseudo go on about what we're talking about tonight. I would have said it to Caleb. I still would have preferred you if you called it bread tube and why it really sucks, but it goes into further in-depth detail. So I really do, but it's a really fantastic book. So look, we'll end it off there tonight. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in 2 Thursdays' time, 7 o'clock, same time, and wishing you all the best. And we'll finish off as workers of all countries unite. Thank you.
Dare to struggle, dare to win.
Dare to struggle, dare to win. Thank you, folks.